Welcome back to BLOCKTV, and you're watching Traders Take. Now, as the crypto markets appear to be rallying, we want to turn to two of our favorite analysts to help us read the charts and give us an indication of where things may be going. So without further ado, here we go to New York, where we are joined by BLOCKTV's Joe Saz and by Bitcoin guru, derivatives trader, and analyst Tone Vay. Hi guys, how are ya?
Pleasure. Great, thanks. How are you?
Cool, I'm glad to have you guys both on, of course. So now before we kind of get into the charts, I wanted to know, did you guys have a chance to watch the Senate hearing yesterday? Focused on kind of regulation. It was a whole congressional mess of regulation and what we can do with blockchain and cryptocurrencies.
I mean, I'll jump in. I saw BLOCKTV was covering it, so yeah, I was watching some of those clips, and one of the main things I kind of got out of that was that whole scenario was just as neutral as the Bitfinex New York Attorney General case. So I'm like, as far as regulation and you know, regulators are concerned, I feel like we're just right back into a super neutral space. The market was, you know, really not impacted. What do you think, Tone?
I saw only the last 15 minutes. I'll be watching it today on YouTube. They usually post them within 24 hours. So I am looking to catch it, but I didn't catch it live.
Cool. So I do think we can agree that blockchain and cryptocurrency education kind of amongst regulators is very necessary. I think they clearly kind of didn't really know. But in general, so Tone, you would be able to touch on this. What do you think of Circle's Jeremy Allaire representing the crypto industry?
I never liked Jeremy Allaire representing the crypto industry. The first conference I ever attended in my life was in April of 2014. And Jeremy Allaire was one of the keynote speakers, and it was one of my first articles I ever wrote. And I quoted him when on stage, he said that the Federal Reserve and other central bankers should have a say in Bitcoin's future direction and where it's going. Now, he said this back in 2014. So the moment I heard that live on stage, I never had a very high opinion of Jeremy Allaire because he doesn't understand how Bitcoin works. So it's unfortunate that he's the man they have in front of Congress trying to explain how Bitcoin works.
One could argue that that is actually the reason that they possibly chose him to represent the crypto industry, because it fed in potentially more to their bottom line necessarily than to the crypto market as a whole. But I mean, you know, they have a ways to go, and hopefully conversations like this will be had until we get some real answers. But now kind of going into the charts, headlines are reading now, Golden Cross, there's significance, we can look up and smile a bit. Is that true?
Right. I say you're right. Look up and smile a bit is pretty much spot on in my eyes. Well, let's see from Tone though, real quick, because everyone knows that I've been, you know, my theory on this. So what do you say, Tone?
Well, I'm looking at the daily chart, and while the daily chart from
I'll pull it up for you right now.
As a structure, the daily chart looks a little bit scary because we are continuing to make lower lows and lower highs, and that tends to lead to more downside. On a intermediate term level, that green arrow on the red 9 that you have looking at the daily chart is currently calling for a 1 to 4 candle bounce to the upside. Now, as long as that bounce stays below your line that you currently have at $10,800, as long as we stay below that line, I think the intermediate term bear market stays intact. Now, by the time we get up there, it's very likely that that moving average is going to be around the vicinity of that line. So is that red dotted line known as the setup trend line on the sequential. That will create a lot of resistance in that 10,700 up to $10,900 area. If Bitcoin can break that resistance, then I think, you know, we could all cheer for the moon and potential new all-time highs later this year. However, odds favor a rejection in that vicinity, followed by sub $9,000 prices.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. I mean, it's the setup trend line, the 50 EMA is kind of rounding out about there. I mean, we got the bodies up here, so it's kind of like a triple resistance zone. And I'm going to agree. This is actually why I closed out my shorts. Once this 9 buy was starting to get taken seriously, I decided I was going to allow, like, take the step back and let us have that 1 to 4 candle pullback. And I strongly believe that we're going to continue downward. But again, one of the main things that I was looking for was some sort of regulatory certainty with the, I guess, more like prosecutional certainty from the judge in the New York Attorney General case with Ifinex. So that was kind of a big deal to me that didn't happen. So I'm still like, I've been saying market manipulation for a while. Right now I'm saying it's now the dust is settled. Maybe Bitfinex and Tether don't have to do as much crazy stuff, so maybe the market will be a little more organic in the short term. And that's actually what I wanted to bring up, was the 15-minute has been looking pretty nice. This is other than a couple of these very choppy instances, you see some flashes to the upside followed by immediate reversals, and the same to the downside. This has been going on for a couple of days. We've had some really like just insane candles that are just, I shredded, over leveraged people trying to market buy high leverage positions. And I mean, it's just chopping people into pieces. But right now we're clearly making an ascending triangle break. I mean, we kind of, have a little bit of a trend going here to the upside. I'm taking this pretty seriously. I think combined with that 9 buy, I think we're likely to break out of this little territory and maybe make a break for 9,800 is kind of one of my first little, I mean, that's actually this resistance area right here. So if we break out through 9,800, I put 10.2 on the table to 10.6, and that's where I'll be most likely reopening my short positions and maybe, just kind of starting at 10.2. If I'm lucky, we get to 10.6 and I'll throw in a bit of leverage there. But for the most part, I'm playing it a little safely right now. It's still, I would say the past few days have made me very uncertain, very neutral.
But let me kind of put this to you guys. So Tone was saying a moment ago, we're experiencing lower lows as well as lower highs. It's kind of a point that you, Joe, were making, I believe, on Sunday, so just a couple of days ago. We have a lot going on in the space right now with Libra last week. Now we had this congressional hearing yesterday, and now today there's an expected Fed decision. So you mentioned, Tone, the Federal Reserve when we were discussing Jeremy Allaire, but there's an expected interest rate cut today, and this is the first time since the inception of Bitcoin that this is happening. Do you think that this will affect the market in any way?
I think that these rate cuts, they affect the market short term just based on speculation. I think they have a little bit less of an effect long term. If we think about it logically, the Bitcoin market should be more correlated with the S&P 500 than not correlated. So if the stock market is doing well, Bitcoin should also do well. My logic for that is when the stock market does well, that means private companies do well. And that means people have jobs, people are earning more, people can potentially get raises. And in a good stock market environment, people have more disposable income. With more disposable income, they can take on, they can put some of that money into very risky assets like Bitcoin. I mean, holding Bitcoin isn't as risky for you and I, Joe, but it is risky for the common average man. So if the stock market is crashing and we're in the middle of like some financial downturn and a recession, people don't have extra money. So the last thing they're looking to do is buy something speculative and gamble on Bitcoin. In fact, if you lose your job and you have some Bitcoin, there's a high probability you'll be selling it, to continue to put food on the table. So if this rate cut is good for the stock market, it should be good for Bitcoin as well.
So Joe, you spoke about this, I believe, yesterday a little bit, but now that we have more information and Tone kind of touched on it a little bit, do you share that sentiment?
Yeah, that's interesting. Tone kind of put a different spin on it than I would think. I agree with a lot of those economic theories on how it'll all play out. I mean, it's a very logical follow through. So it is interesting. I think my personal belief is this is such an isolated community that an act like this in the United States isn't that big of a deal to the crypto markets, and it might be a bigger deal to the stock market. But I feel like cutting rates encourages spending, so that's definitely good. But I think it encourages spending on things that people would be paying interest on, so more like cars and houses and stuff like that. So I'm actually let's say Tone took me from neutral straight 5 to a neutral 6.5 or so on that. But I agree, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and Joe, and that's in theory. In reality, the short-term volatility and speculative trading on Bitcoin completely trumps any kind of a global macro. But it's good to think about these things every now and then.
And
yeah, of course.
And speaking of the market surging, right, with everything happening, and maybe potentially after this news will be more, but we have in 4 days Litecoin. I know your boys' favorite topic in the world, but Litecoin, we have the halving in 4 days. Do we think that this will create some sort of jump? Are we seeing anything as of now?
Oh, here we go. Now it's starting to party. 9 buy, jumped up. So Tone, what do you have, like, according to sequential, when you see something like this versus something like this, a buy right after the 9, what in your eyes is the difference between a sequential 9 buy over here, where we turn into a green 1, and this one over here?
This is a pretty rare pattern. It's looking bullish right now. We know there's this fundamental event coming, and that is a secondary low. Now you can look at the oscillators here, because the volume is really dwindling, and that worries me a little bit. I don't like the declining tiny volume, but I also see your RSI right there, and that has, that looks very, very positive. I would take a look at the oscillators here. If the oscillators are bullish, I would potentially take this breakout seriously. But I think this is just last minute hype and mostly hope that the halving is going to amount to something. I can see Litecoin popping up here, maybe as high as $110. And after that, I think it's going to take a big step down. I would, if I was chasing Litecoin to the upside here, I would, keep my stop losses very, very tight. This looks like a low risk buying opportunity right here, with stop losses right under $85. And, hopefully you can get a little jump, especially if Bitcoin rises over the next few days. I mean, generally all crypto is correlated with Bitcoin.
I'm gonna
keep going, Joe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've been saying that this move is a risky move, because it's basically, in my eyes, other than this 9 buy on Bitcoin, I was looking at the Litecoin halving move as a counter trend move, being that it was going against the overall trend of Bitcoin moving in a downward trajectory. So I think that the Litecoin halving pump hype, or whatever we want to call this, trying to get in before it skyrockets, if that's on the table, would be that it would be a counter trend move, and it would probably be small. But this is crypto, and obviously anything can happen. So that's why it's such a risky bet in my eyes. That it's like I'll want to take a chance, and maybe double or make some money on this trade. But at the same time, what happens if the pump doesn't make a move, right? If we don't get a halving pump, then that's going to tell me a lot about the market psychology and the state that we're in right now as well. That if people aren't, if traders aren't flooding into Litecoin to catch a halving pump, then that it opens up a whole new level of thought, and probably a few of them.
That's an interesting point, just because also, Charlie Lee we spoke about this earlier this month, that he said basically that it's already kind of factored in, because people knew about this halving. It wasn't some surprise. I know that you don't share that sentiment, Joe, but again, it's what he said, and it seems to kind of be correlating with what's happening more or less. But then kind of let's shift and take a look at Ethereum, that was very close at one point to once again going below 200, but now we see that it's jumping a bit. What can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I will add that Charlie Lee is one of the best technical analysts of all time. So his opinion should be taken seriously. He did sell his bags of Litecoin that he grew himself at the all-time high. But onto Ethereum. So this is basically what I was seeing, Tone. The flagpole and the pennant formation here. With right now, it looked like when I drew this on Litecoin, it looked like Litecoin started to break to the upside. But that's basically what I'm seeing is a flagpole. You know, maybe not all this length, but you know, this is getting pretty interesting. I think for Ethereum, where I see us poised for a pretty dramatic breakout in either direction.
Yeah, I'm leaning bearish here with Ethereum, unlike Litecoin. Ethereum, just like when Ethereum's in the news, it's not for good reasons anymore, right? Like the last time Ethereum was all over the news was because they were going to use Bcash as their scaling solution. I mean, it's just like it gets really, really bad.
But it was Ethereum's 4th birthday yesterday. Turned 4 whole years of age.
It was Ethereum's birthday yesterday?
It was.
And wasn't it Justin's son's birthday too?
Oh God! And then we have Bcash's birthday coming up tomorrow.
We should make a calendar, and then we'll all be up to date.
And I'm also looking at Ethereum versus Bitcoin chart, and it's not looking very good. I don't know. I'm a pretty big bear on Ethereum in general from a fundamental perspective, as much as technical. We may want to look at a weekly scale here as well, and it's just, you know, that is not a good-looking structure.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it has a chance to eventually make it all the way up to its 50-period moving average, that yellow line. Mm-hmm. But Ethereum's just been so weak since the high, and we are now looking at multi-year new lows. It's coming up on a 9 weekly coming up. I mean, the last time it had a bunch of those green arrows, it tends to bounce a little bit. Not on that one, but like when it hits the sequential stuff. But yeah, it's not looking very good for Ethereum. That is not a very encouraging chart. I like to see things, you know, trending up, not making new multi-year lows.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is an all-time, like we're in all-time low territory against Bitcoin. That's like pretty terrible. I mean, if you're talking about Bitcoin being, you know, a Bitcoin maximalist sees Bitcoin as, you know, being this revolutionary asset. Ethereum being questionable, and I like the way Peter Todd puts it, that a lot of the things that Vitalik says that are going to be used to make Ethereum work are intentionally vague. And so basically that's what Vitalik does to draw on this, you know, this following of people that strongly, you know, they call them F-heads, you know, like people that are like, you know, hugely in favor of the future of Ethereum and, you know, what it can do. So I don't know, being at all-time lows is pretty terrible for any asset. I'm not seeing a capitulation there either. You know, I'm not seeing, you know, if we're talking lows, I like to see a big move to the downside with a lot of volume and then support. And like a price area where people refuse to let the price go any lower. And looking back at the chart here, relative to Bitcoin, I'm not seeing any particular big volume move and any particular refusal of any price below that. So, you know, we have kind of slowed down for the past 3 weeks relative to, you know, everything before it. But yeah, this is not what I want to see if I'm looking for a bottom. I think this thing's going lower relative to Bitcoin.
I mean, with Ethereum, you know, a lot of people say it's a platform, and eventually it might just be a platform for building things on, as opposed to a coin that succeeds. But you know, time will tell in that sense, as you just said. Now with Binance Coin, if we can move on to them, they were, you know, Binance Coin was climbing in market cap. Joe gave a whole spiel of how there is 2 reasons that somebody would have Binance Coin. And if you could tell me more about what's going on there, please.
So, and I talk about this enough. I mean, like all these spinning tops is just insanity to me. I mean, other than that, you know, or what do you take of that, and what do you take of Binance BNB and price action?
So Binance continues to benefit from, you know, being, I guess, the first coin to be used inside of an exchange just to give people discounts. I think this is, you know, not to comment on their ethical practices of doing that. I mean, I don't like it, but now the jig is up, right? This is just like Ethereum. Ethereum had a first mover advantage on creating a token for a smart contract platform. And Ethereum now has competition from EOS and Cardano and Tron and, and God knows what else. And all of that is going to split. So while Binance was somewhat innovative in the beginning, they've already shown experience that they don't know how to protect Bitcoin as they got hacked. And now their business model of creating a token inside their exchange for people to speculate on, now everyone else is following that model as well. So from a fundamental perspective, the first mover advantage is over. And other exchanges are going to do the same unless the regulators come in and stop this practice from happening. So I can see one more bounce off of that moving average in Binance from a TA perspective. But in the long run, either the Binance token becomes a security of Binance and not a utility, because it just makes no sense. Like the business model, it only makes sense if you want to just speculate and make money on that token. It doesn't actually have any real useful functionality. And this is why I don't like doing TA on things like that, because their business model has just been tricking people for the last 3 years or 2 years, as long as they've been around. And eventually that ends. And when that ends, the markets get very confusing. This is why Ripple has already gone from, sub a penny to $4 to now 25 cents. And who knows where it's going next, because their business model just makes no sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tone, were you looking at this Binance, sorry, wrong charts, Binance relative to BTC?
Yes, I was looking at this. So it's in a reasonable area for one more run up. It's sitting at prior swing high and at the same time being supported by the moving average. And maybe it'll come down, for a couple of more weeks. It bounced off of 9s before very nicely. You can see that all the way at the low right there. It bounced very nicely and had a good run up. So we can maybe see that one more time, but Binance token is not something I would be investing in.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's so important to note the difference between price action relative to the US dollar and price action relative to Bitcoin. I mean, we were reaching US dollar all-time highs, and we're still, in that territory relative to the past, but it's like, I mean, this looks really bullish. We were skyrocketing here. But I guess, the crypto market should be very familiar with, vertical run-ups and what happens afterwards. So as far as BNB is concerned, I kind of look at Binance Coin as, the first word that comes to mind is trash. And the second one is a scam. It's like, it's CZ's stock in CZ, him personally. And the only other thing that I think Binance Coin was good for was that it looked like it was running up. So I feel like traders had a mutual unspoken agreement. That's where they would park their money, because you sometimes see that in some of these random crypto assets. So that's kind of all I saw BNB as, and I never, wanted to play with that, but everything works until it doesn't, and it looks like we're on the downside move. So I mean, Binance Coin could, it depends, and September's drawing near. We have Binance is getting kicked out of the U.S. at least temporarily. So who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I don't know what. So some speculate that around 50% of Binance volume is U.S. Some speculate it's far less. I know the last number we heard a long time ago, maybe a year ago, was that 8% of people in the U.S. know about Bitcoin and probably far less own. And I don't know what the most recent figures are with that. So, I mean, there's a couple speculations there, but overall, I'm definitely long-term bearish on BNB.
Yeah, we definitely, as we said before, we need some crypto education. And Joe, you are never subtle with your thoughts on particular coins as you were with BNB, and we just have to see with them, right? They're shutting down operations in the U.S. soon. We'll see what their alternative to that will be, whether it'll work or not, and for sure that will then affect BNB in general. I'd like to thank you two very much, Tone Vay and Joe Saz, for joining us for this rendition of Trader's Take and giving us your insights. It's been lovely. For all of you out there, keep watching us at blocktv.com.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter